with the fun stuff, which is our presenter for today. Why are we all here? First of all, we're all here because you signed up to this green team gathering, and the topic was energy efficiency is trendy too. And I think there's a lot of excitement and enchantment about, you know, getting solar panels up either on our houses or on our various faith communities buildings. But what about the first step, which is really something we all can do right now, which is try to do energy efficiency upgrades. And so that's why I think we're all here, is to learn more about how to engage that step instead of just jumping right into the trend of solar panels, which are great, but also can be costly and usually kind of fix some issues that you could do with energy efficiency upgrades instead. So now I'm going to introduce our speaker. We asked Bruce Hunn to join us to talk about his ministry of doing energy efficiency audits with congregations, not only here in New Mexico, but he worked extensively with congregations in North Carolina with North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light. I think he audited about 30 or a little or over 30 in North Carolina, and he's audited 2 here in New Mexico right before COVID hit. And so he's thinking about getting that going again now that we're starting to be a little bit safer in our various practices in this time. And so he's going to share with us some of the ins and outs of energy efficiency and some of the work that he has done with congregations here in New Mexico specifically. And then we'll have some time for, you know, some questions and answers after his presentation, and then we'll go from there. So without further ado, please, Bruce, why don't you share your wisdom?
Well, thank you. Before I start screen sharing, just a little more further background. I am, by lots of education, a mechanical engineer and majored in the thermal sciences of thermodynamics and heat transfer. And so energy matters come quite naturally. And I've been conducting research in the analysis of energy use in buildings and solar applications there too for the last 40 years plus. How I got into this specifically after I'm also a very active member of ASHRAE, the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers, which is a 50,000 member educational organization with worldwide membership. And we focus on these things by creating standards and conducting research as well as educational things. And I'm still very active in ASHRAE, and in particular on technical committees that deal with energy auditing. And so it's right up the alley. After I retired from ASHRAE staff in 2012, I went back to figure out, well, how could I apply these things in a useful way? And being a lifelong Episcopalian, and though the Episcopal Church was very interested in climate issues, I began to say, well, look, I can apply these things by just doing free energy audits, as many as I could. And so I've been doing that for the last 10 or 15 years. So with that as background, what I would like to do today is kind of 2 things. And Emily has really highlighted the first, and that is to emphasize the importance of energy efficiency that should precede houses of worship in applying for and installing solar. Solar is great, no question about it, but it should be done. You should first do energy efficiency to reduce the electric load, and therefore you would need a smaller array and less costly array. Either do that prior to solar or coincident with developing and installing solar. The second thing I would like to do is begin a discussion on how we can develop a more coordinated procedure for how do we conduct energy assessments of our houses of worship here in New Mexico. I know relatively little about it. We've only been here 2 years, so I'm not sure how others have gone about this, but I know a lot about what we did in North Carolina. And so what I want to share with you today is our experience there and give you some examples as to what we've been doing here in the Albuquerque area to continue that process. So at some point here, maybe not today, but what I'd like to find out from each of you, or as many of you who represent various congregations or faith communities, how do you assess the energy use in your facilities? And do you use P&M auditors? Do you use other auditors? How do we go about this? And what are some of our experiences? So with that as a background, I'm going to try, I guess, do I share the screen here or you do that, Emily?
I think you can, and then you're able to read it at the same time.
All right, so I'm going to share screen. There we go. Just what I need here. Start with this one. Good. Can you see that?
No, there isn't anything up.
Okay, that's my screen. Start share. There we go. Does that do it?
Yes, it is beginning, and we can see your energy savings analysis.
Great. Okay. I'm going to need to be able to scroll down on this thing. So wherever that is. Okay. First of all, this is a capsulization of the document that we developed in North Carolina for a methodology for energy savings analysis, sometimes called energy audits or energy assessments. And this relates to what we call in ASHRAE our level 1 energy audit, with an option to include some parts of a level 2 audit by including the important parts of a level 2 audit and fairly the simpler ones. So the first thing you do is you need to identify a knowledgeable contact person for the congregation, and working with that person and the various clergy or others in the congregation to conduct the following tasks. So starting out with task 1, and let me see here, I need to scroll down here. There we go, found the right button to push. So the first task is to gather and analyze monthly utility bills for principally, certainly electricity, typically natural gas, sometimes propane or other fuels. We like to gather 2 or 3 years of typical operation in order to note trends over time. However, if that's not available, at least monthly bills for the past 12 months. Now, I should point out that now that we're in COVID, many houses of worship, probably all of them, have been dormant for a while. So the 2012 bills are not representative. So it should be 2019 or prior. And what are the kind of things we want to gather? Of course, electric use in kilowatt hours, and in peak demand if you are on a demand rate schedule, and that would be in kilowatts. The electric use cost that you pay per month, and then the same sort of things for fuel, typically natural gas in therms and cost per month. Optional items, you don't always have a monthly electric demand. It depends on what kind of rate schedule you're on. For the smaller facilities typically would not be on a demand schedule, and so you don't pay for the demand separately, but the larger ones probably do. And an electric load factor is essentially how peaky your load is It's the ratio of your actual energy use to the energy use you would use if you were always at the highest peak load. And so that varies typically around 20 to 30%. But that's an option. And I should point out here too that we often will examine the electric rate schedule to see whether you're on the proper rate schedule that gives you the best rates for your facility. And as you will notice as we go along, I'm a nerd with this stuff, and I actually think it's great fun to do energy audits and stuff. So I have to emphasize that you are not going to necessarily want to get into the detail that I often do. Now, the next thing to do is once you have gathered these utility bills, and that's not always an easy task, because having to get somebody at the parish level to dig these out of long dormant files is often a problem. Excuse me. Too much talking. So we first wanted to take that monthly data and convert the electric energy to thermal units of kilo-BTUs, thousands of BTUs. And then we want to divide that by the square footage of the buildings itself, the facility. And that latter can be a bit tricky as to where do you find an accurate listing. Sometimes you go to tax records. I often go to architectural drawings, and you have to just be very careful to get an accurate listing of the square footage. And then you do you add the two together. You convert the electric units to kilo-BTUs by multiplying by 3.4, and then the gas in therms multiplied by 100 to get kilo-BTUs. That puts them on the same scale of measure. You add them together, and that gives you the total energy use at the site, not at the source, not back at the energy source, but that typically comes about through analysis of the cost, where that takes that into account, the difference between electric and gas. And you do this by year, and you do the same thing for the cost, total cost of the electric and gas, including all the fees and taxes. And then you plot this stuff up and see what it looks like. I typically do this by a spreadsheet for multiple years, first monthly electric or monthly gas, or you can do a stacked bar chart of both, which I will do for the annual, and I'll show you what that looks like that shortly. So sometimes if you want to go into a little detail, you look at the energy cost that is for the electric part, the electric demand, and the gas part. And you can put that into a pie chart to see how much of your cost is going to each of those areas. Then I say there's an optional thing here. Some of you may know about the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. It's an EPA program that is really very useful. It's user supplied data. You can enter this stuff and it gathers all this together, provides a total annual energy use intensity per square foot, like we just discussed. And it compares that with other houses of worship in your climate zone. So this is a very good benchmark for determining how well your facility will stack up against others. And benchmarking is a very important part of the energy audit. How do you know how well you are doing? Now, you can get an energy use index of BTUs per square foot per year, but that can vary all over the place. And how do you know if that's you're doing well or not? So that's the first part. We sometimes call that the preliminary energy analysis. The next thing is the site visit, which I typically conduct at least a 3-hour walk through the facility, accompanied by a facility manager and sometimes clergy or pastors to find out what's really going on in the building. And there we look for floor area and take some measurements sometimes, or try to get architectural drawings. We want to identify the space functions. That is, where you have a worship space, classrooms, offices, conference rooms, and so forth, kitchens, all of which have different characteristics. And you look at the weekly operating schedules. How many hours per week are these operating? And that's one of the characteristics of houses of worship. It's a very intermittent occupancy. Often the Sabbath times, you're going to have fairly heavy use for several hours. Often during the week, some smaller facilities will only be occupied maybe 2 or 3 weekdays. Others will be 5-day weekdays. So you want to calculate or determine the weekly operating schedules, and that's done by asking the person accompanying you on the audit to tell you what that is by different space types. They all vary. Then you want to look at the overall characteristics of the building envelope. Can you find out how old the walls and the windows are? Are they single glazed, double glazed? What kind of insulation may be available? And that is often not readily known. Often it's not even on the building drawings that you may have. So you have to ask people, and if you have a chance, for example, in a false ceiling, if you can poke your head up there, you can tell whether there's insulation under for the roof, which is most important. And somebody will have to tell you, or you have to just guess at how much insulation is in the walls and the floors. You also want to examine all appliances and equipment, particularly in a kitchen where you have hot water heaters as well as refrigerators and freezers that are running 24/7. Those tend to be big users of electricity. Also, you want to look at the HVAC systems and the thermostats in particular. You can get, if the facility people have the specs on that from the manufacturer, distributor, Train or Carrier or whatever. Is it a heat pump? How old is it? Can you get an idea of what its energy efficiency ratio is? And very important is how many thermostat zones are there. Examine every one of those and determine if you have a programmable thermostat, who programs it, who sets it, who is in charge of making sure that it gets set and changed as needed. That's a very important thing. If you don't have a programmable one, you certainly want to find out who sets, and particularly the setback and setup temperatures when the building is unoccupied. So you look for the hours that it's occupied and unoccupied, and do the thermostat settings match the occupancy? That's key. And you want to look at the age, general condition, and maintenance procedures of all of the equipment and the envelope. So during that walkthrough, you also want to look for no cost or low cost energy efficiency measures. And you discuss that with the folks there. Of course, you're going to be looking at lighting and some of the no cost issues typically that I emphasize is thermostat management. When you'd find out, well, golly, we just don't know who sets these thermostats. I don't know what the setback temperature is. You got to dig through that to find out. And when you just can adjust them, doesn't cost you anything, and you can save a lot of energy. So the cost, you're looking for impacts by low, medium, and high. Now, on the walkthrough itself, you may just identify those at a very highest cursory level, and you won't get into that until task 3. So after the site visit, then the auditor's job really begins to do a detailed inventory of lighting, appliances, and HVAC equipment. Now, I do this in great detail. Why? Because I'm an energy nerd and I love to do it, and it's great fun. Not everybody has got the time or energy to do this, but it's very helpful. So when I do the walkthrough, we will identify each and every light, what its wattage is, and an estimate of how many hours a week it's operated. The same for appliances and equipment. That is, you want to identify the age and type of water heaters. Are they in an enclosed space? Are they outside, or are they in a crawl space? And that makes a difference as to what their loss rate is. And identify all the HVAC equipment by zone. So what I do there in particular is I try to build it up. I start with identifying things that we can know when they're on and how many hours they're on, what the wattage is. You can say, okay, there's a fixture of a, say, 32 watt bulb, and it's in a 4 bulb fixture, multiply that out. So you've got so many hundreds of kilowatts or watts there, times the number of hours per week, multiplied by 4.3 or so, you get the number of hours per month. So you get kilowatt hours per month. That is fairly accurate if you add all of these up. Now you do the same for your refrigerators. You got to look at the specs on the inside there, take a picture of it. I often have to go back to manufacturers to find out how old they are. But typically there are resources that take a bit of digging to find out if you know the model number and the serial number of a particular freezer or refrigerator. You go to the manufacturer and they can typically give you the number of kilowatt hours used per month or year. And they do that because they're on 24/7. And so, if you've got a certain size of a refrigerator that's on 24/7, and you know how old it is, and they tell you how many kilowatt hours it would use per year. So that I add those into on another spreadsheet. And then on a third spreadsheet, I calculate or I then document the HVAC equipment, their age, their efficiency ratio as best we know it, and other characteristics. Now, the trouble is, that's where your heating and cooling occurs. And there's fans associated with the distribution of heating and cooling that you can't really measure directly. And you have to back that out. So what I start with is everything that I can identify as being on or off. And as I described before, how many kilowatt hours per week, per month. And I add those all up. And I put down lighting as one set, appliances and equipment as another set. And that's all I can do in terms of getting a pretty good idea of your energy use per month for lighting and appliances and equipment. The rest of it is typically going to be for heating and cooling, which is the largest amount typically, without question, but there's no way to directly measure that. So what I do is I will do a little calculation starting with the lighting and appliances and equipment, and I will do a little pie chart, and I can get a fairly good estimate of the total energy use for each of those end uses, lighting and appliances and equipment. And then I won't get into the details, but there are a lot of sophisticated ways to back out the HVAC used for heating and cooling. And that's done by looking at heating and cooling degree days, which is weather data that's available from the US Weather Service and a number of other places for your particular location. So typically, I have found that heating is dominant in all of the houses of worship I've looked at, usually somewhere between 50 and 60 or 70% in terms of energy use. Now, be careful because as you will see shortly, because the electric use is more costly by a factor of 3 or more than the unit of energy delivered by natural gas, whereas the predominant energy use is from natural gas, the predominant cost is electric. So you just need to bear that in mind. If you're interested in saving money, you really focus on the electric use. So anyway, I build all these things up through a series of spreadsheets and plot it all up, which is the most fun is that. And I'll show you some of the results we've had for our church here in Rio Rancho. Now, the task 4 is a final report that I prepare, and that includes a narrative account, and it also includes an estimate of the, I forgot to mention, task 3, bullet 2 is table of recommended energy efficiency measures. And I will identify these for lighting and appliances, which is fairly straightforward to do by knowing the characteristics and specs of, say, a refrigerator and what its annual energy use is. And then I will go to, say, the DOE's energy website, where they have the latest of what the standards are for the most recent highly efficient, energy efficient appliances. So if I know the energy efficiency rating for the most recent one compared to the one I've got installed, I can estimate the annual energy and cost saving. So I do this where I can for, it's readily available in lighting, and I can readily do that for appliances and equipment. But I don't do that for HVAC equipment because it's, as I indicated, the only way to I have to do a very rough estimate of that energy use. Now, other more sophisticated auditors that I have seen will in fact go through and based on heating and cooling degree days, will do an estimate of heating use and cost as well as for cooling. But I typically don't do that. I back out at least to the what I think the overall use pattern is. But I only, as you will see, in my final report, I only will address the low and medium level things that are low cost or no cost. For typically lighting and appliances, I'll estimate what the savings of those will be. The others, typically, I will have to leave to a sophisticated HVAC engineering firm that will come in. And of course, for a charge, they will be the ones that can actually calculate the payback period. So I typically don't do that. So task 4 is the final report that includes all the stuff that I mentioned and a narrative account of the process. So, and my reports typically are about 6 or 7 pages, fairly detailed, and I will show you some characteristics of those for examples. But I have just gone through checking some other sources that I have Um, there's an organization in North Carolina, and maybe national, it's called Waste Reduction Partners. They operate on grants and the like, and they do mostly free energy audits. They'll produce a 15 to 16 page report full of lots of photographs and crawling around in the attic and taking pictures of insulation and HVAC equipment. I usually don't go to that level of detail. And others that I know of too, 2 or 3 other auditors out in North Carolina who do hundreds of audits, they generally have 15, 16 page reports, which I find to be probably more than you really need. And I wonder how much people really actually read these. So maybe it'd be good to pause there, or I can move you on to showing you some examples of portions of reports. Emily, how do you want to do that?
Yeah, I was wondering if we could just pause if there were any questions about this part. I know I had one, but I want to just check and see if anybody else had a question. If you wanted to type your questions into the chat, or feel free to just unmute yourself and mention it. My question was just a clarification. It sounded like, so you were saying usually you've found that the heating portion of energy use was about 50 and up to 70, between 50 and 70%.
Yeah.
And later you'd mentioned if you wanted to have more money savings, you would try to reduce the amount of electric that you're using and not heating. So is heating then you're reducing it for just the sake of reducing your energy use? Was that kind of the difference?
Well, I'd say sort of.
Okay.
Most congregations are most interested in cost saving, and that makes the most sense, because when you do energy retrofits, where you have to invest capital costs, you've got to figure out a way to pay for them, and you want to focus on things that have the quickest payback, and that's typically the electric matters. The HVAC stuff tend to be what we call capital expenditures. HVAC rooftop units are very expensive to replace. So if you have an old one, unless it's near the end of its life, it's best to focus on other things. For example, we have 7 HVAC rooftop units at our about 18,000 square foot facility at St. Francis Episcopal in Rio Rancho. And that cost us about $25,000 to replace one that burned out on us. So I guess to answer your question is, you don't want to ignore the heating, cooling items, but to reduce your energy use there, those typically are a lot more expensive and have longer payback periods. So focus first on the electric items, lighting and equipment.
That makes sense. Thank you. Yeah, that was good clarification. And I had asked because I was thinking about, other ways. I mean, obviously I think a lot of our green teams, the best selling point in terms of trying to convince the wider congregation or faith community to take on a project is there's money savings, but then I was trying to see if there were other angles in that as well. So thank you. Were there any other questions before we, I think I'd want to, we can move on to Bruce, your examples of the congregation's energy audits that you've done. Maybe have that be like about 5 minutes or so of presenting that, and then we can move on to more of a discussion, because I think
we're running out of time. I know there's a lot to cover here. Okay, well, let me
well, Dodie had a question first. Dodie, what's your question?
Hi, Bruce. That was very, very interesting. Thank you so much. I'm Dodie Hawkins from Center United Methodist. My ears perked up when you were talking about ceiling insulation, because at Central, my understanding is that we are having a major roof repair of our beautiful tile roof. And I'm wondering, is there something in particular that I should be questioning, not looking for, but questioning, or should I assume that the roofing company will do adequate insulation? I mean, I know that's very specific, but kind of in general, that just, you said you have to look up there to see what kind of insulation.
I understand, yes. I would say that roofing repairs, when it's time to do that, are a great opportunity that you don't want to miss to insulate the roof. And I would just leave it up to the roofing contractor. In all negotiations with that contractor, you want to have him or her estimate what is the level of insulation that's in there now. You're going to want to try to get up to 30 or 40 R value. I would say the roof is where you lose the energy for heating and for cooling as well. The walls are far less important. But if you're doing a roof repair, that's the time to sit down with the bidders and say, okay, give me an upgrade. What's it going to cost to increase my R value up to at least 30, I would say.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, all right, Emily, we are ready?
Yes, I don't see any other questions. So yes, we can.
Okay, so here's the second item. Now, this is a summary page that I include in my energy audit report. And this was for our facility, St. Francis Episcopal Church in Rio Rancho, and just give some typical use characteristics. Things that we're looking for is what are the weekly operating hours of the whole facility? And we're at about 45 when we're accepting COVID. The number of worship seats, which is an item that comes into an Energy Star portfolio manager characterization, and that tells how big it is. And the average Sunday attendance for us is about 100. So we're way under capacity in terms of worship seats, and the gross square footage here. And I'm in the process now of questioning this 22,000. I think it's too large. That was one figure I got from one source. Others, I actually went to the tax records, and they had it listed about 18,000. And I'm thinking it's somewhere in between there, and I need to look at that more carefully. So that just illustrates that it's not that easy to get an accurate view of the gross floor area. Energy characteristics, you can see here is just a summary. The electric, the PNM electric 5GS here, New Mexico Natural Gas, SGS, small gas service. The energy audit that I did the Energy Star score for 2017 and 18, which were pretty good, 80 and 81. I think that's a little bit high. I think I've got the floor area not quite right. And then I do the total annual cost of electric and gas. So you can see we're running about $12,000, $13,000 a year. And that's a useful number to have. And we have replaced, at the time this was written, we had to replace one of our units in 2018. In 2020, we had to replace another one. So the next thing here are the pretty stuff that I like. These are the annual use and costs that are built up from my monthly spreadsheets, okay? I include the monthly spreadsheets as an attachment to the report, so you can see how things behave seasonally. But I think this page, one-page report, is to capture kind of a quick overview of how we're doing. So at the time, I was able to get 2017 and 18 numbers here. I've since gotten 2019 numbers that aren't included here, but this illustrates. On the left is the annual energy use gas and electric in equivalent units. And you'll see, if you can read it, it's kilobTUs per year. And this is not per square foot. That's just the actual use. On the right is the energy use index divided by square footage. And you can see they're pretty much the same, but you can get an idea of what the numbers are. The EUI is what we typically measure to scale the building to size. So we can compare a big facility to a smaller one. Of course, there are a lot of other things that cause variance, but that's kind of the major one. So if you'll notice, the energy use and EUI is dominated by natural gas, as I indicated before. Now, if you look, however, at the annual energy cost, which reflects the fact that electricity per unit of energy delivered is like 3 times or more that per unit as gas delivered cost, you can see that the electric clearly drives the energy cost. And of that $12,000 or so per year, something like $10,000 of it is for electric and only $2,000 is gas. That's something that astounds a lot of people if you just aren't expecting it. And the energy cost index is indicated here. And then now down at the bottom here is, I think, something that I have not seen any other auditors quite do. And I keep a composite of about nearly 30 churches that I have looked at, mostly in North Carolina, mostly Episcopal churches. And I plot the range of EUI in kilobTUs per square foot per year. And the little red arrow says, this is where you are. You are here. And as you can see, they range from about 20, low 20s, all the way up to 100. And you can see there's quite a bit of variation. The median is somewhere in here, and most get grouped there in the lower half. And another measure that I think is very useful is energy cost annually compare with other churches. And here you can see that St. Francis is somewhere a little below the middle, and that's our $12,000 a year. But notice that 2 or 3 of the churches in North Carolina were well up into the over $70,000 a year, and that's big stuff. That's very costly. And interestingly, for this particular church, when I sat down, went through all this with the energy manager or the business manager that paid all these bills, I said, "Do you have any idea how much you guys spend per year on energy?" She said, "No, I have no idea." And she was astounded it was over $70,000 a year. So that's important. And then let me kind of wrap up here with the other thing I've just put in the part of the report that is the recommendations. And I've got it divided into high priority, medium, and low. And you'll notice that this reflects what I have talked about earlier. High priority are nearly all lighting or thermostats. First one, item number 1 is thermostat management. Review all the programmable thermostats and ensure that someone is responsible for maintaining these proper settings. And you'd be surprised, or maybe not, that most churches don't have anybody that looks after that typically. And in our case, I'm the guy that has to go in there and check these and find that they're not set right. Somebody who sets it on hold, and it's on all the time, it's not setting back. And so I indicate here that the energy and cost savings are significant, but I have not calculated that because it's not something that's readily calculable. Now, the next ones here are all lighting measures. High pressure sodium bulbs in the parking lot. And I can calculate that by estimating what the wattage is totally. And we got a big parking lot and we had a lot of lights on all the time, not all the time, but about 6 hours a night at least, 7 days a week, all year round. And there's the kilowatt hours, and the amount of savings would be if we went to LEDs, which in fact we have just done within the last 3 or 4 months. So we did a complete change out, and I looked at the energy bills before and after, and they were running in the neighborhood of 1,000 to 1,500 a year. So that's not insignificant. This is annual numbers. The next is just their exterior entryway lights bulbs. We had a bunch of bollards light bulbs. They were halide, metal halides. We replaced all those with LEDs as well. So those for 2 and 3 have already been done, and we are reaping the, as well as 4. We've done 4 as well. In the sanctuary, we replaced we had a whole bunch of 250 watt incandescent bulbs in pendants. We replaced those all with 20 watt LEDs, and replaced a bunch of lights in the chancel area and the like. And the 14 CFL lights were in some side aisles. They were really not needed to be on, and I recommended that those be turned off even during the daytime services. We rarely have something in the evening, and if it is, you can turn them on. But that's included in this whole lumped thing here. So it depends on how you want to lump things, and this I thought it was more helpful to the congregation. Then the next thing here was something in the kitchen. We had a GE refrigerator in our sacristy, which is where the altar guild prepares the altar. And it turned out it was not needed. There were a couple things put in there that really didn't need to be there. We just unplugged the thing. And in June of 19, and we saved that many kilowatt hours and saved about $50 a year. No cost to us, just unplug the thing. The next final item was 6. There's a GE refrigerator freezer in the parish hall that could be consolidated with the ones in the kitchen. And we had another St. Paul's UCC sharing our facility, and we were able to consolidate these. So again, a no cost item here, and we were able to eliminate one of those refrigerators, saving about $130 a year. And then in medium priority is those that are going to cost something, typically, that are a little bit more expensive. And these are lights that are not on as much as in the high priority, okay? High priority were the ones that were on more hours a week, including our office area was one of those, but they didn't have as many very high intensity lights as in priority 1. So these are the second tier. We are our parish hall. We have not done that one in the kitchen area. We haven't done that one. The plan is to replace all of those with LEDs with the savings as indicated. And as you can see here, priority 2 savings typically for lighting are a lot less than they are for priority 1. And that's a good reason why they're in medium priority, because the savings are lower. The third office area is another win-win deal. We replaced all of the fluorescent lights, of which there were about 16 or 17 4-bulb fixtures that were on not that many hours a week, but we did a complete change out. And I would add here, we had a $10,000 loan from New Mexico IPL that we're paying back to pay for this. And the savings were fairly significant. And by golly, those fixtures were replaced with what are called flat panel LEDs, which I didn't realize how inexpensive they were. compared to replacing the individual tubes, the flat panels are brighter. They are just marvelous. And of course, that was all done by a contractor. Whereas we happen to have a member of the parish who works for a lighting contractor who did all the ones in priority one. And he got up on ladders and he was able to get a good deal for us to change out all those parking lot lights. But that's unusual. You're hardly ever going to have a parishioner who can do that. So we would have normally had to hire an electrical contractor. It's not something I'd do, that's for sure. And then a couple other lighting retrofits. And you'll see down in here at the bottom, item 12, there were some hot water pipes on 2 water heaters that were not insulated in terms of the sleeves. We haven't done that yet, but it's only very modest savings, but something that should be done because it's very easy to do. Then in low priority are the things that are going to probably cost the most. There were a number of incandescents. Well, sorry, this one is not. These were incandescents that were not on very often, and they were not high wattage. So in terms of the number and the hours on, weren't going to save an awful lot. So that was 3rd priority. We have not done that yet. And then 14, we considered installing occupancy sensors in all the restrooms. We haven't done that yet. That usually has pretty good payback, but it's hard to tell because you have to estimate, guess how many hours are people leaving lights on when they shouldn't. We have a very energy conscious congregation that doesn't leave those lights on. So an occupancy sensor probably wouldn't make much difference. So that's why it's down at low priority. And then the HVAC systems, replacing those with higher efficiency, that is put to when these are nearing the end of their service life. We already had done that with one of these that I just mentioned. That was that $25,000 job. We got a very high efficiency unit, the highest we could get, something like 17 EER of 17, compared to what was in there before, which is probably down around 12 maybe. So, and the estimated cost for these replacements, I didn't estimate them. If you want to do that, you have to get an estimate from a reputable lighting or HVAC contractor. So that's enough talking. That gives you an idea of what's in our reports and how it's structured. And hopefully it's these were highly useful. Well, at least I can guarantee that we did a lot of the big ones already. And so we're real happy with that. But we're not done yet.
Thank you, Bruce. That was wonderful. Lots of really good information about so many different aspects of energy efficiency. Like I didn't even know to the extent that you could go in upgrading your energy efficiency. So thank you so much, Bruce, for this presentation and also for your ministry in providing these energy audits to congregations. I know you've mentioned that you've been focusing on Episcopal congregations, but I imagine you, and I think Dave Robertson too, who's on the call, who's the Congregations Committee, are thinking about offering this ministry to other folks as well, once we get the system going down with that. So for all of you out there who came to this presentation, know that you got a really good detailed look at what this is going to look like. We had a couple people need to leave because we do have 3 minutes left in our thing, but I know Tiffany Curtis from the Open Circle Disciples of Christ was interested in being in touch with you about energy audits in the future.
Okay, and Emily, you can distribute these 3 documents to everybody.
Great. Yes,
I will. Already.
Can I ask a quick question
Sure.
about In what about ceiling fans in vaulted sanctuaries?
Those can be highly effective. We don't have any in our parish hall or in our sanctuary, which has a very high ceiling, and it helps both with the heating and the cooling. And they don't use that much energy, but it is an expense that could be considered. But I'd put it down at probably a lower priority compared to insulating your ceiling and to managing your thermostats and dealing with the lighting. Those are the more important things.
Okay.
And bear in mind too, the ceiling fans will help with HVAC use, which is predominantly going to be fuel use. And as you notice, that is much fewer dollar savings than the electric use. So that's why I would put it at a medium to low priority.
Thank you.
But they do help, no question about it.
I wanted to reinforce something Bruce said. First of all, Bruce, that was a very thorough presentation and right up my alley. So thank you. I appreciate what you did. And I look forward to working with you on some of these audits. But what I wanted to reinforce was the idea of people in the congregation or church community being responsible in terms of having a person that controls the programmable thermostats and just doesn't let them run wild, whatever they happen to be set at for years. And also accounting to the primary staff at the church, like say the business manager or the minister or whatever, because what you said about the minister having no idea how high the energy bills were, I think is quite common. And so I think getting people into the fold, one of the important things we can do here is getting people into the fold, getting them to be at least even slightly aware of how much the energy costs are and what the potential is for savings. So thanks so much.
Sure. Well, that's absolutely true. And I would just add that of these 30 churches I've looked at, I know more about what we did with our church. Of the others, I have to admit, I have no idea. I've not followed up. I've made these recommendations numerous times, and whether they've been followed, I can't tell you. I wish there was some way. That should be part of our whole process here in New Mexico, is not only to do the audit, make the recommendations, but follow up in a few years or a couple of years to see what's happened. But that means somebody's got to take the time to do that. And that's what the difficult year. And I hope that this can be the beginning of a nucleus of us who have a passion and expertise in this to see how we can implement this throughout the area.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Bruce, for your wonderful answers to the questions. We are now a little bit over our time together. I was inspired by just this presentation and how rich it was. We didn't have a time to discuss how our specific faith communities might speak to some of these actions, like what scripture verses might speak to these things, or what traditions might speak to these things. You'd be surprised, there are. I know that Congregation Albert, for example, has a sustainability plan where they've listed out scriptures and commentary on scriptures as a justification for doing things like changing out their light bulbs with LEDs. So I think what I'll do, because they've given me permission what I'll do to close out our meeting is I'll send their sustainability plan to all of you. And what I was inspired to do is maybe our next Green Team gathering, what I'll invite us all to do who are in this presentation and others who weren't, but maybe will watch the video, will be to sift through some of your own faith traditions, your scriptures and your traditions. And when we meet again, maybe bring some of those justifications why we do energy efficiency, and we'll have kind of a networking conversation centered around that will be the plan. So that will be sometime in May, probably around the same time this one was, and they've been at the end of the month. And other than that, I'll just send an email out to you and thank you all for coming. This is great.
And I'm happy if you can communicate with me by email or phone or whatever, and let's talk.
Perfect. Wonderful. All right. Blessings, everyone.
Emily, I have a quick question.
Yes.
Oh no, now I forgot it. That's terrible.